Hello everyone, and welcome to Train Talk. With the consolidation of North America's railway network over the last several decades into just a handful of companies, there are numerous railroads that are no longer in business as the result of mergers, buyouts, or outright abandonment. One of the most recent freight rail carriers to cease operation was a regional railroad known as Montana Rail Link, or MRL for short. This was a network of several hundred miles of rail lines through the southwestern portion of the state of Montana and northern Idaho. Effective January 1st of 2024, BNSF Railway has taken over all operations on former MRL trackage. Montana Rail Link was a well-known and well-loved railroad among enthusiasts and photographers. The company's striking blue and black paint scheme, coupled together with ancient first and second generation diesel locomotives, incredible scenery, and, in many ways, anachronistic infrastructure, made for some of the most incredible mountain railroading scenes anywhere in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. In this special episode of Train Talk, we will thoroughly examine the entire MRL system, focusing on how the railroad appeared and operated during its final decade. Our discussion will be in 4 parts, beginning with a generalized overview of all the rail lines, then the equipment, operations, and finally an overview of the history of the company right up to the BNSF takeover in 2024. This is the first in what will be an entire series of videos about MRL and their operations. Future videos will include episodes of following a freight train, and later on, a video covering the transition of the railroad from Montana Rail Link to BNSF control over the last several years. We have a lot to get to even in this video, so let's get started. Montana Rail Link was a Class II regional railroad. The United States Surface Transportation Board breaks down all freight rail carriers into one of 3 different classes based on annual revenues generated by the railroad. Class II railroads bring in between $43.7 million and $1.05 billion annually. In 2019, MRL reportedly carried a total of 440,000 carloads of freight, or more than 1.6% of all freight traffic in the U.S. Montana Rail Link began operations in 1987 when the company made an agreement with the Burlington Northern Railroad to lease their former Northern Pacific Railway mainline across southern Montana. In so doing, the MRL became what is known as a bridge line, carrying rail traffic across its system from one part of the Burlington Northern to another. Burlington Northern was merged into BNSF Railway in 1995, but the previous lease agreement with Montana Rail Link remained in place. Eventually, MRL came to operate a total of 937 route miles of track through southwestern Montana and northern Idaho. This amounts to a total of 1/4 of all track miles in the state of Montana. As of 2021, the company averaged over 23 trains per day and served 125 local Montana businesses. Let's take a close look at the entire Montana Rail Link system map. MRL had one major east-west main line that traveled through southwest Montana with 5 different branch lines to serve local industries. It made connections with major BNSF rail lines at either end of the system in Huntley, Montana, and Sandpoint, Idaho. There were also connections to secondary BNSF rail lines out of Laurel, Montana, and Garrison, Montana. For operational purposes, the MRL also had trackage rights west of Sandpoint all the way to Spokane, Washington. Except for a few of the branch lines, all of the former Montana Rail Link system is still fully active under BNSF management as of late 2024. As is the case with other U.S. railroads, the MRL was broken into multiple different subdivisions for better organization. All MRL subdivisions were numbered. Subdivisions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10 were all portions of the main line. Subdivision 1 began at Jones Junction just east of Huntley and went as far as Laurel, located directly to the west of Billings. Subdivision 2 picked up at Laurel and followed the Yellowstone River west to Livingston, over Bozeman Pass to Bozeman and Logan, then north along the Missouri River through Lombard Canyon to Helena, Montana's state capital. Subdivision 3 continued west from Helena over Mullen Pass, and then along the Clark Fork of the Columbia River to Missoula, Montana. At Missoula, the main line split into two sections for a short distance. Subdivision 4, the longer route, continued west along the Clark Fork all the way through the mountains and into Sandpoint, Idaho. Subdivision 10 split away from Subdivision 4 at De Smet, first heading to the north over Avaro Hill and then following the Flathead River to Paradise, where it joined back up with the 4th Subdivision. This is also the point where the Flathead River joins the Clark Fork. In the Northern Pacific days, the 10th Subdivision was used as the passenger route primarily since it was more direct and had steeper grades. Under MRL, and today under BNSF, this section of railroad is mostly directional running, with westbounds taking the 4th Subdivision and eastbounds taking the 10th. The other MRL subdivisions, numbers 5 through 9, 11, and 13, were all used for branch lines. Some of these were still in service at the time of the BNSF takeover, while others were no longer active, albeit still retained by MRL for potential future use. The 5th Subdivision was known as the Pipestone Branch. It traveled between the main line at Logan and Spire Rock. This was once a portion of Northern Pacific's main passenger route, which traveled over Homestake Pass and through Butte, Montana, bypassing Helena and Mullen Pass. The western portion of this line has been out of service since before the MRL takeover. Subdivision 6 is one of the two shortest subdivisions on the railroad, coming off the 5th Subdivision at Sappington and traveling a few miles south to serve an industry at Harrison. The 7th Subdivision was another branch off the 5th, but has been out of service since the mid-2000s. It ran between Whitehall and Alder. The 8th Subdivision was, like the 7th, a long out-of-service branch line. It ran from the MRL main line at Drummond south to Phillipsburg. The line has been out of service since before the existence of MRL. Subdivision 9 ran south from Missoula to Darby and was known as the Darby Branch or Bitterroot Branch. It was served by a local until flood damage took the line out of service in 2013. The 11th Subdivision, known as the Polson Branch, ran from the 10th Subdivision at Dixon to Polson. It was closed in 2011. Finally, the short 13th Subdivision traveled from East Helena to Montana City to serve one industry. This was originally part of the Great Northern Branch Line from Helena to Butte. It was the only portion of the entire MRL system that was not previously owned by the Northern Pacific. Montana Rail Link maintained several major rail yards. From east to west, yards were located at Billings, Laurel, Livingston, Bozeman, Logan, Helena, Missoula, and Paradise. Livingston was also the main locomotive servicing and repair facility for the MRL. Geographically, MRL was very much a mountain railroad. The eastern end of the system began on the very edge of the Great Plains and then traveled through several different ranges of the Rocky Mountains and along the Bitterroot Range on its westward journey across the state. The line crested the Rockies at two major mountain passes. Bozeman Pass, between Livingston and Bozeman, reached an elevation of 5,600 feet, while Mullen Pass, just west of Helena, topped out at a maximum of 5,500 feet. Both passes feature grades of about 2%, with a long tunnel at the summit. During the course of its existence, Montana Rail Link owned over 200 diesel-electric locomotives. While all of these units were initially built by General Motors under their electromotive division, the vast majority were purchased used from other railroads. According to the book Montana Rail Link Locomotives and Rolling Stock 2000, the initial 52 locomotives acquired by MRL were purchased as part of the initial lease agreement with the Burlington Northern in 1987. These included some SW Series switchers, GP9s, and several SD40 locomotives. In the early days, the SD40 fleet was used for most of the regular jobs over the railroad. This included MRL's own trains and through Burlington Northern traffic. The GP9s and switchers were used for locals and yard work. As traffic grew, Montana Rail Link expanded their fleet even more. Locomotive model types that MRL purchased over the years included SD40s, SD45s, F45s, SD35s, SD9s, GP9s, GP35s, SW9s, SW1200s, SW1500s, and a GP40. The SD45 fleet was by far the biggest portion of the Montana Rail Link roster. At one time, the railroad owned over 6 dozen of these locomotives. The units, numbered in the 300 series, came from several different railroads including Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, Burlington Northern, Norfolk and Western, and Seaboard Coastline. SD45s, as opposed to many other similarly sized locomotives, featured massive 20-cylinder engines. These were powerful machines, but not nearly as fuel-efficient as the more common 16-cylinder units. This resulted in many of the SD45s being replaced first when newer locomotives arrived in the mid-2000s. As the old locomotives suffered significant failures, they were pulled from service one by one, stripped of usable parts, and eventually scrapped. By the time of the BNSF takeover on January 1st of 2024, only one MRL SD45 survived intact on the roster. MRL number 355, previously Burlington Northern 6558, likely became the last operable 20-cylinder locomotive on a U.S. Class I railroad with the BNSF takeover. After a couple more months working the Laurel to Billings yard transfer in early 2024, the locomotive suffered a mechanical failure and was promptly taken out of service and stored at the Livingston yard. Following the SD45 fleet, the second largest group of locomotives on the MRL roster was the SD40 fleet. This included over 30 units, most of which came from Burlington Northern and the Chicago and Northwestern. They were numbered in the 200 series. Several standard SD40s were rebuilt in the mid-1990s with EMD's Dash 2 electronics system. Once completed, the locomotives were given the model number SD40-2XR, and all were renumbered in the 251 to 265 range. In addition to these standard SD40s, MRL also rostered a single SDP40 type, number 290. This locomotive was originally built for the Great Northern and had a steam heater for use on passenger trains, hence the P in the locomotive's model designation. Also numbering approximately 30 total units on the roster were the GP9 locomotives assigned to the 100 series. Outside of the switchers, these were some of the oldest locomotives on the MRL, all constructed in the 1950s. Most of the GP9s were purchased from the Burlington Northern in the late 1980s. They were a mix of former Great Northern and Northern Pacific locomotives. Others came from the Chicago and Northwestern. The GP9s were the branch line local workhorses of the MRL for most of the railroad's 36-year history. By the date of the BNSF takeover, there were still 7 of these locomotives in regular service. However, their time with BNSF was very short-lived. All 7 of the remaining GP9s were placed into storage by the beginning of August of 2024. The only locomotive type Montana Rail Link purchased new was the SD70 ACE. These were the locomotives that replaced older F45 and SD45 units on the mainline trains and in helper service system-wide. MRL purchased 16 of these locomotives in the 4300 series beginning in 2005. Another 9 locomotives in the 4400 series were acquired in 2013 and 2014. In addition to these 25 units, MRL later purchased 4 used locomotives that had previously operated on BHP mining railroads in Australia. All of the SD70 ACE locomotives lasted on the roster through the end of the MRL. In addition to locomotives, Montana Rail Link also owned a number of freight cars, including boxcars, various gondolas, and hopper cars. Cabooses were used for many years with the GP9s in yard switching. Many of them were equipped with remote control operation capabilities. 90% of freight traffic carried on Montana Rail Link came from through BNSF freight trains. Knowing this, it's little wonder that BNSF was so eager to buy the MRL out of their lease early. In 2019, over 24 trains a day on average were passing through Billings. Most of the through freight traffic from BNSF was regularly scheduled trains between the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, including intermodal, unit coal from the Powder River Basin, grain trains taking loads to the ports of Washington and Oregon for export, crude oil, new vehicles, and major airline components including fuselages destined for Boeing. BNSF trains typically ran with their own locomotives across the MRL, with the exception of helper units that were added to assist trains over Bozeman Pass and Mullen Pass. Aside from the BNSF traffic, MRL operated several of their own trains. Most of these were various yard jobs and locals that ran over small portions of the system. Only one regularly scheduled MRL train traversed most of the main line. This train ran between Laurel and Missoula and was known as the LM. The eastbound counterpart was called the ML. ML and LM trains operated multiple times a week in each direction, taking 1 to 2 days to travel from one end to the other. As soon as a train arrived at the end of its journey, it wasn't long before the power was turned and another set of cars was readied to head back out in the other direction. These trains would make setouts and pickups regularly at Bozeman and Helena. When the traffic between Laurel and Bozeman was too much for the LM and the ML to handle, Montana Rail Link would run an extra train from Laurel to Bozeman and return. For BNSF trains, as well as the MRL's own LM and ML, sets of helper locomotives were stationed out of Helena and Livingston. These were manned sets of 3 to 4 locomotives that were placed in the middle or on the end of through freight trains to assist them over Mullen and Bozeman passes heading west. Once the train made it over the pass, the helpers were taken off and then sent back east to await the next train in need of assistance. Outside of the main line and through freight traffic, MRL ran several different locals and yard jobs across the system. The most well-known of these trains among rail enthusiasts, called the Gas Local, carried gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel between Missoula and Thompson Falls. The train was operated to bridge a gap in a pipeline across western Montana and made 2 round trips a day. It would also serve some of the remaining lumber industries in St. Regis. Additional locals ran out of Helena, Logan, and Billings on weekdays. The Helena local, given the operating number of 840, served industries south and east of Helena, including the Montana City branch and several businesses in Townsend. The Logan local, Job 844, switched multiple industries in Logan and along the 5th subdivision as far as Whitehall. It also served the Harrison branch 1 day a week. Finally, the Bozeman local, Job 841, worked several businesses around Bozeman. It also ran on most days from Bozeman to Logan and once a week from Bozeman to Livingston. As of 2024, all of these locals continue to operate under BNSF. However, there are a number of local MRL trains that have ceased operation over the years. The Darby local ran twice a week along MRL's 9th subdivision between Missoula and Victor. Service was disrupted due to flood damage in 2011. After repairs were completed in 2012, the local continued to run for an additional year with service reduced to 1 trip each week. Operations finally ceased in 2013. The Polson local operated over MRL's Polson branch. For a period, the train was based out of Missoula, but it was later shifted over to Paradise. Service was discontinued in 2011. Another local that used to run out of Missoula was the Schilling local. This train ran most days of the week from Missoula to the Frenchtown Pulp Mill. Following the closure of the mill at the end of 2009, the local was also discontinued. Finally, the Paradise local served many of the lumber industries in St. Regis and Thompson Falls. It ceased operation in 2015 due to dwindling lumber traffic, making its final run on October 23rd of that year. The remaining industries continued to be served by the gas local. In addition to all the locals and through freights, Montana Rail Link operated many different yard and switcher jobs out of Billings, Laurel, and Missoula. While most of these were confined to the yards or industries located nearby, the Missoula switch job also made trips a few times each week out on the main line as far as Bonner to switch out a lumber yard. To keep the railroad in a state of good repair, MRL ran many work trains. These trains were seen frequently all over the system, performing such tasks as tie and rail replacement, reballasting, and more. Speaking of ballast, MRL also handled gravel trains over the 5th subdivision that were loaded at a quarry in Pipestone. Today, the 64-acre Pipestone quarry continues to primarily produce crushed stone for use as railroad ballast on the former MRL trackage, as well as elsewhere on the BNSF system. The history of Montana Rail Link dates back to 1870 when the Northern Pacific Railway began construction on a new transcontinental rail line between the Upper Midwest and the Pacific Northwest. Northern Pacific built across the southern portion of North Dakota and Montana, continuing all the way to Seattle, Washington. The railroad was completed on September 8th of 1883 when east and west sections were joined at Gold Creek, Montana. For nearly 100 years, operations continued under the Northern Pacific, experiencing various cycles of boom and bust. During the second half of the 20th century, the Northern Pacific, like many other railroads, experienced financial hardship due to increased competition from other modes of transportation and overregulation, preventing them from being able to compete effectively with the trucking industry. To remain competitive, the Northern Pacific, Great Northern, Burlington route, and Spokane, Portland, and Seattle all merged to form the Burlington Northern Railroad in March of 1970. Since both the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern operated in similar regions of the U.S., they had many redundant rail lines. In particular, both companies had main lines connecting the Midwest and Pacific Northwest by way of North Dakota and Montana. Burlington Northern quickly began shuttering lines that it viewed as superfluous to its operations, although the Northern Pacific main line through southern Montana was initially kept intact. Management at Burlington Northern wanted to focus resources on the former Great Northern route across the state while downgrading the Northern Pacific main line for lighter regional traffic. By the 1980s, some traffic was on the rise, including coal, but the Burlington Northern no longer wanted to devote the resources necessary to keep the rail line open. The company began to look for ways to divest itself of its route through southern Montana. However, significant changes were on the horizon. Dennis Washington, a businessman from Spokane, started the Washington Construction Company in 1964. His company started out by performing contract road work in the inland Northwest. Over time, the business grew as Mr. Washington acquired other companies and expanded into other areas of business, including mining operations in Montana. According to the present-day Washington Company's website, profits from the Montana mining ventures in the 1980s allowed the company to further diversify, this time into the railroad sector. When Washington found out that the Burlington Northern was no longer interested in operating their southern Montana mainline, he approached the company about entering into a long-term lease agreement. Negotiations between Burlington Northern and Washington companies began in 1986 and concluded in early 1987, according to the book Montana Rail Link Locomotives and Rolling Stock 2000. With a deal reached, Montana Rail Link officially began its lease and its operations on October 31st of 1987. The lease agreement was for a term of 60 years. Headquarters for the new railroad were based in Missoula, Montana. Immediately, Washington went to work improving the railroad, repairing portions of the line that needed rehabilitation, and seeking out potential new customers. In 1988, a portion of the Livingston Shop Complex was opened to perform contract repair work for other railroads. Through freight traffic from the Burlington Northern and local traffic on the MRL continued to grow into the 1990s. With the success of Montana Rail Link, Washington companies expanded further in the railroad sector, purchasing outright a short line in the Vancouver, BC region. As outlined earlier, Montana Rail Link continued to purchase more equipment to meet demand. Some equipment was shuffled to other Washington Company railroads, including sending several GP9 locomotives from MRL to the newly formed Southern Railway of British Columbia. In 2009, MRL tested out a genset-type locomotive from National Railway Equipment, but no units were purchased. Even with the overall success of the railroad, Montana Rail Link, like most other freight railroads, lost several local businesses in the wake of the 2008 recession. In 2014, the railroad served 150 Montana businesses. This number dropped to 125 by the year 2021. Infrastructure improvements continued to be made in the 21st century. By the early 2000s, the last of a handful of surviving semaphore-style signals on the MRL were retired. The final existing miles of jointed rail were replaced with continuous welded rail as well. In 2019, the railroad began the installation of positive train control. With through traffic on the MRL continuing to surge, BNSF Railway became increasingly interested in terminating the Montana Rail Link lease early. It was finally announced in early 2022 that BNSF and Montana Rail Link had come to an agreement to end the lease, pending review by the U.S. Surface Transportation Board. Reportedly, BNSF had agreed to pay the company $2 billion for the early termination. On March 8th of 2023, the deal was approved. Montana Rail Link's final day of operation was set for December 31st, 2023. After 36 years of serving the Northwest, Montana Rail Link has run its final train. While the company still retains ownership of some of the branch lines, BNSF Railway will be the operator of the Southern Montana Rail Line going forward. The future may bring even more improvement to this critical railway, including the possible restoration of passenger rail service for the first time in several decades. Whatever happens, MRL has served Montana well for over 30 years. Locals and rail fans alike will long remember the sight of dark blue EMD locomotives traversing the many prairies, river valleys, and mountains of Montana. Thanks for joining me for this special episode of Train Talk on the Montana Rail Link. As always, a special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to see more in-depth Train Talk episodes on other freight railroads, let me know by posting a comment in the comments section. To receive notifications whenever I post to YouTube, click on the subscribe button and select the Receive All Notifications option. I'll be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time with a brand new railroading adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.